There are some structures that you cannot see externally on a skull, but they are still present internally, and we'll take a look at a cross-section to examine those. So in this cat skull, which has been divided sagittally, you can see the huge amount of turbinate bone, which is again that lacy structure that you can see if you look up into the nares. Turbinates are here. There's a big frontal sinus, and that is actually within the structure of the frontal bone itself. So it's a gap where sinus material is. There are several empty spaces or cavities within skulls, including the frontal sinus and sphenoid sinus. Sphenoid sinus is kind of down on the bottom of the skull, near the skull floor. And as you follow that back, you can see the sphenoid sinus is just anterior to this little divot that looks like a saddle. It's called the Sella turcica, or Turkish saddle, because it kind of has the form of an old-fashioned saddle. And within that cavity, that's where the pituitary of the gland of the brain rests. This is supported by this whole little structure. The brain itself is sitting within the cerebral fossa and the cerebellar fossa. So the cerebrum of the brain and cerebellum of the brain. Fossa is just kind of a depression or a cavity. Dividing the cerebral and cerebellar fossa is a ridge of bone called the tentorium. You can kind of see on this edge the sticking out part of the nuchal line. The internal auditory meatus. So internal auditory meatus, external auditory meatus. At the front of the cerebral fossa, you can see a small plate here, which if you angle it, there's a bunch of holes in that plate right here. That is the Cribriform plate, which is part of the ethmoid, the internal structure in the front of the skull. An easier way to see that Cribriform plate is if you turn your skull and look through the foramen magnum. And you see that archway filled with holes. That structure itself is the Cribriform plate. Again, part of that embedded ethmoid. This skull is unique in that it does express a little piece of that ethmoid bone. You can see a smaller round suture surrounded structure here. That's part of the ethmoid, which is normally embedded here. Sometimes it expresses to the surface of the medial surface of the orbit. So again, Cribriform plate in the ethmoid. All right, thanks for listening, and hope to talk with you soon.